People assume you recognize the moment your life splits in two. There's supposed to be a crack of thunder, a dramatic sentence, a door slam. For me, it was a casserole dish. It was glazed ceramic, the kind Lorraine insisted we use for proper family meals, because paper plates were for people with no standards and no lineage. I was standing at the kitchen island in our Wash Park Craftsman house, hands still damp from rinsing rice, when I heard it clink too sharply against the granite. Not broken, just loud enough to feel like a warning. Lorraine didn't look at me when she set it down. She never did when she was deciding something for my life. My name is Elena Morales. I'm a structural engineer in Denver, which means I spend my days running calculations and inspecting beams and columns so a building doesn't fail when it's pushed. I understand load paths, stress points, hidden rot. I understand what happens when people keep piling weight onto something that was never designed to hold it. The irony is, I didn't apply that logic to my own home fast enough. The house was beautiful in a way that made strangers feel comfortable commenting on it. Wide porch, tapered columns, stained glass accents by the stairwell. So solid, people would say, smiling like they knew anything about foundations. The truth was, it wasn't solid. Not emotionally, not financially. The house belonged to my husband, Victor, and his mother, Lorraine. At least that's how Lorraine liked to say it, as if ownership were a birthright passed through her bloodstream. She called it our family home, and she said it with the kind of emphasis that made you feel like you were trespassing even while you were paying the bills. Because that was the part no one applauded. I covered the property taxes, the insurance, the repairs that always seemed to pop up right after Victor assured me his business would stabilize soon. Victor ran a small construction company, the kind that lived and died by contracts, weather, and whether a client suddenly decided they wanted a different vision. Some months he brought in great money. Other months he brought in apologies. Lorraine treated those apologies like proof of his goodness and my obligation. And then there was Mateo, my son, 14, quiet in rooms where he didn't feel safe, brilliant in spaces that didn't demand he shrink. He could read a person's mood in the way they closed a cabinet, the way their tone tightened around a name. His father died when Mateo was 5, an accident on I-25, a phone call that cleaved my life into a before and after. Victor came later, steady at first, kind enough that I believed I'd found a second chance. He knew Mateo wasn't his biologically. He promised that wouldn't matter. Lorraine never promised that. She didn't attack Mateo outright in the beginning. She was too careful for that. She used omissions the way some people use knives, quiet, precise, leaving wounds no one else could see. At gatherings, she'd introduce Victor with pride, Adam with indulgent affection, and me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Mateo would stand beside me and she'd say, "And this is Elena's boy," as if he'd wandered in from outside and I was still deciding whether to keep him. Mateo tried anyway. He held doors. He offered to help with groceries. He said yes, ma'am, for an entire year, even when Lorraine never once called him her grandson. He wanted to belong. Kids always do. Lorraine watched him try the way you watch someone test a boundary, waiting to see how far they'll go before you push back. Victor noticed things, I think. He just didn't absorb them. He had a talent for becoming background whenever Lorraine entered a room, like if he stayed quiet enough, conflict would pass through him instead of sticking. I told myself it was stress. Habit. The weight of a lifetime under Lorraine's rule. But that casserole dish on the counter, that sharp little clink, felt like the start of something more honest. Because that night, as Lorraine listed what she wanted for Sunday dinner, who was invited, what I should cook, what Mateo could do to help, I looked at my son's face and saw the smallest flicker of dread. Not teenage boredom, not attitude, dread. Like he'd learned that meals in this house weren't about food. They were about hierarchy. And in that moment, something in me went very still. Not fear, not rage, calculation. Because I knew this much about structures. If the foundation is compromised, it doesn't matter how pretty the house looks. Eventually, under enough weight, it fails. By the time Sunday dinner arrived, the house felt like it was bracing for impact. Lorraine had been orchestrating it all week, texting guest confirmations, revising the menu, reminding me which serving platters were appropriate. She moved through the kitchen like a general preparing for inspection. I moved beside her quietly, measuring ingredients with the same precision I used at work, except this time the stakes weren't steel tolerances. They were social ones. Mateo stayed upstairs most of the afternoon. I told myself he was studying. I knew he was waiting. Victor had promised me, softly, late at night, that he would say something if his mother crossed a line. He didn't specify what that line was. In engineering, ambiguity gets people hurt. In families, it gets them erased. Guests started arriving at 4. Neighbors, Victor's former high school friend, Adam's latest business mentor. Lorraine greeted everyone at the door like royalty receiving tribute. The house glowed under carefully chosen lighting. Music drifted up from the speakers Adam had insisted on installing in the living room. From the outside, it looked cohesive. Underneath, it was carrying too much weight. Mateo came downstairs only when I called him to eat. He'd changed into a button-down shirt without being asked. My chest tightened at that, at how much he was trying to reduce himself into acceptability. Lorraine stood at the head of the table once everyone was seated. She loved a speech, loved the way conversation stalled and attention collected around her. To tradition, she began, lifting her wine glass, to family, to legacy. Her gaze lingered on Victor, then Adam. "My boys," she said warmly, "the continuation of everything we've built." There was polite laughter, a few nods, then her eyes shifted, slowly, deliberately, to Mateo. "And," she continued, voice light but sharpened at the edges, "to those who are fortunate enough to be welcomed into that legacy." The air changed. I felt it like a pressure shift before a storm. Mateo's hand paused halfway to his water glass. Lorraine smiled at him the way you smile at someone who doesn't understand their place. "It's important," she said, addressing the table, but looking at my son, "to remember that not everyone at this table shares the same blood. Some people are guests, and guests should behave accordingly." A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Someone cleared their throat. Victor stared down at his plate. I waited. Lorraine set her glass down carefully. "You're not part of this lineage," she said directly to Mateo now, "so don't get comfortable." The words landed clean. No theatrics, no shouting, just precision. Mateo didn't cry. He didn't argue. He just got very still, the way structures do right before they crack. Victor murmured, "Mom," but it wasn't a protest. It was a request for her to lower her volume, not her sentiment. And that was the moment something inside me aligned. I wasn't surprised. I wasn't confused. I was done. I placed my napkin on the table with deliberate calm and stood. "If he's a guest," I said evenly, "then so am I." Lorraine's brows lifted. "Elena, don't make this dramatic." I looked at Victor. He still hadn't met my eyes. "You said you'd say something," I reminded him quietly. His jaw tightened. He didn't speak. Silence is a decision. I turned back to Lorraine. "You don't get to define my child's worth at your table," I said. "Not now. Not ever." Lorraine laughed softly, dismissively. "If he can't respect this family structure, then take him and leave." There it was. The fault line. Mateo looked up at me, not panicked, not pleading, waiting. And in that moment, all the calculations I'd been running for months settled into place. I reached for his hand. "Go pack a bag," I said calmly. "Just the essentials." The room erupted into overlapping voices, Lorraine accusing me of overreacting, Adam muttering about sensitivity, a guest whispering that this wasn't appropriate. Victor finally stood. "Elena, wait." But I wasn't waiting anymore, because I had already reinforced what mattered, and I was ready to let the rest collapse. Mateo didn't hesitate. That was the part that hurt the most. He didn't argue, didn't ask where we were going. He just squeezed my hand once and walked upstairs, steady and quiet, like he'd been expecting evacuation instructions for months. The dining room buzzed behind me, Lorraine outraged, Adam scoffing, one of the neighbors murmuring, "Maybe we should give them space." Victor stepped toward me, his voice low and urgent. "Elena, please, don't do this in front of everyone." I almost laughed. She had done it in front of everyone. I had simply responded. "I'm not the one who made this public," I said evenly. Lorraine stood now, cheeks flushed. "You're blowing this out of proportion. I was speaking about heritage, tradition. You're too sensitive." "Heritage doesn't require humiliation," I replied. Victor ran a hand through his hair. "Can we talk upstairs?" "We've been talking upstairs for 3 years," I said. "Nothing changes." Upstairs, I heard drawers opening, the quiet zip of a backpack, Mateo moving efficiently. Lorraine crossed her arms. You live in this house because of this family, she snapped. Don't forget that. That sentence, the confidence in it, told me she still believed I was bluffing. I wasn't. 2 months ago, when Adam claimed my home office and Victor said it was temporary, I had scheduled a meeting with our mortgage lender. Not emotionally, logistically. I had co-signed the refinance during Victor's downturn. My income had been essential to securing it, which meant the house wasn't just sentiment. It was liability. Shared liability. I walked past the dining table to the built-in desk near the entryway. Lorraine hated paperwork, said it gave her a headache, which is why she never touched the file folders there. I opened the drawer and removed a manila envelope. Victor's voice sharpened. Elena, what are you doing? I pulled out copies of the refinance documents and laid them flat on the table. My name, I said calmly, tapping the page, is on this loan. Lorraine scoffed. Of course it is. You're married. Yes, I agreed, which means my income is underwriting this property. Victor went very still. I redirected my direct deposit last week, I continued, and I canceled my contribution to the joint autopay this morning. Silence. Adam let out a short laugh. You're threatening us over a dinner comment? No, I said. I'm responding to a pattern. Lorraine's face drained of color in slow increments. You wouldn't sabotage your own home, she whispered. It stopped feeling like my home a long time ago. Footsteps descended the stairs. Mateo appeared with his backpack and a small duffel bag. He stood beside me, close but upright. Victor looked at him, then at me. Where are you even going? Seattle, I said. That word hit the room like dropped glass. I accepted a senior engineering position last month. Starts Monday. Victor blinked. You what? I was waiting to see if things improved, I said. They didn't. Lorraine's voice trembled now, but with anger. You ungrateful, after everything this family has done. What exactly has this family done? I asked quietly. Besides, teach my son that he's conditional? No one answered, because there wasn't an answer. Victor stepped closer. We can fix this. I studied his face, searching for urgency, for conviction. What I saw was fear, not of losing Mateo, not of losing me, fear of instability, of financial consequences. I've been carrying this structure, I said softly, and you've been pretending the cracks weren't there. Mateo's hand slid into mine. Lorraine's voice broke. If you walk out that door, don't expect to come back. I nodded once. That's the point. I opened the front door. Cool Denver air rushed in, sharp and clean. Victor didn't follow. Lorraine didn't apologize. Adam didn't look up from his phone. And as we stepped off the porch together, I realized something steady and certain. Some buildings aren't worth reinforcing. Some are better left behind before they collapse on you. Seattle felt different the moment we landed. Not lighter, just quieter. The kind of quiet that doesn't demand anything from you. Mateo pressed his forehead to the taxi window as we drove toward our temporary apartment in Queen Anne. Gray sky, evergreen trees, water flashing between buildings. He didn't say much, but his shoulders weren't tight the way they had been for months. That was enough for me. I started work that Monday. The firm was everything Victor's house had not been. Structured, direct, respectful. When I spoke in meetings, people listened. When I raised concerns, they were documented and addressed. No one called me dramatic for identifying weak points. No one told me to be patient while something cracked under pressure. Mateo started at a new high school 2 weeks later. He joined the robotics club before I even suggested it. The first time I heard him laugh in the kitchen while video calling a new friend, something inside my chest eased in a way I hadn't realized was possible. Peace is subtle at first. You notice it in the absence of flinching. Back in Denver, things did not remain subtle. 3 weeks after we left, Victor called. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. How are you? He asked, voice tight. Stable, I replied. He exhaled shakily. Mom's upset. I waited. We're a little behind, he admitted. Your deposit didn't go through. That was intentional, I said. Silence. Elena, he tried again. You can't just withdraw like that. It affects everyone. I looked out at the sound, wind rippling the water into shifting patterns. It was affecting us, I said. You just didn't call it that. He swallowed. We can work something out. Can you? I asked gently. Because when it came to Mateo, you didn't. That ended the call. Over the next month, the tone changed. Fewer attempts at reconciliation, more urgency, late fees, contractor payments delayed, insurance notice warnings. Adam, apparently, had not secured funding for his platform. Lorraine, according to Victor's texts, had begun calling the lender directly, demanding extensions. Indignation does not renegotiate amortization schedules. 3 months after our move, I received a certified letter forwarded from Denver. Notice of delinquency. I read it once, then set it aside. I had expected it. Victor called again that night. "We're in pre-default," he said bluntly. "The polish was gone now. They're talking foreclosure." Mateo was at the kitchen counter doing homework, headphones on, focused, calm. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said. "You're on the loan," Victor pressed. "This affects your credit too." "I spoke with the lender before I left," I replied. "I structured my liability carefully." He went quiet. "Elena, we need you." There it was. Not "I miss you." Not "Mateo deserves better." We need you. For the house. For the numbers. "I'm not structural support anymore," I said softly. His voice cracked. "So that's it? You just let everything fall?" I closed my eyes for a moment. "No," I said. I stopped holding it up alone. That night, after Mateo went to bed, I opened my laptop and reviewed the documents again. The loan, the equity, the market value in Wash Park. I ran projections, not out of revenge, out of clarity. Because structures don't collapse overnight. They give warnings. And when they finally fail, someone always asks why no one reinforced them sooner. The truth is simpler. You can't reinforce something that refuses to redistribute the weight. And I was done carrying it. By the 6th month in Seattle, the calls stopped sounding angry. They started sounding scared. Victor's voice had lost its edge. Lorraine no longer left clipped voicemails about family loyalty. Even Adam's occasional texts, usually links to half-formed business ideas, had gone silent. What replaced them were forwarded notices. Default status, acceleration warning, intent to initiate foreclosure proceedings. I didn't react immediately. I waited until Mateo left for school one morning, then called the lender myself. I asked for the full status summary, payment history, outstanding balance, reinstatement figure, timeline before public notice. The numbers were worse than I expected. Victor had missed more than just my portion. He'd been patching holes with credit. That's the thing about structural failure. Once one's support gives way, the stress redistributes violently. By that afternoon, Victor called again. "They're moving forward," he said, voice hollow. "Mom's losing it." I pictured Lorraine pacing the living room she once guarded like a throne room, the same room where she declared my son a guest. "What do you want me to do?" I asked. "We need to stop foreclosure," he said quickly. "You're still on the refinance. If you help catch up, we can restructure." Help. The word tasted different now. Not partnership, extraction. "I'll fly to Denver," I said finally, "but not to patch." There was a pause. "What does that mean?" "It means we're not pretending this is temporary." 2 weeks later, I stepped back into the Wash Park house with an attorney beside me. The air felt stale, dimmer. The hardwood floors scuffed in ways Lorraine would once have considered a moral failure. Bills were stacked on the hallway table where I used to keep organized folders. Lorraine opened the door. She looked smaller. "Elena," she said, voice brittle, "you came." "Yes," I replied evenly, "to resolve this." Victor stood behind her, exhausted. Adam hovered near the staircase, arms crossed but unusually quiet. We sat at the dining table, the same one where Mateo had been told he didn't belong. My attorney opened his briefcase and laid out documents with calm efficiency. "The property is an active pre-foreclosure," he explained. "Reinstatement is possible within 30 days. Lorraine leaned forward desperately. "Then let's do it. We'll fix it." I folded my hands. "I'm willing to cover the arrears and refinance," I said, "under one condition." Victor already knew. Lorraine didn't. "The property transfers fully into my name," I continued. "Quitclaim deed, sole ownership." Silence. Adam let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "You're serious?" "Yes." Lorraine's face flushed red. "You're stealing our home." "I'm purchasing control of an asset I've already funded for years," I corrected. Victor's voice trembled. "Mom, we don't have another option." Lorraine looked at him like betrayal had just taken human form. "You would let her take this from us?" Victor's eyes dropped. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "I offered partnership," I said quietly. "You offered exclusion." My attorney slid the deed across the table. "Foreclosure auction is the alternative," he added gently. That landed. Because banks don't care about lineage. Lorraine's hands shook as she stared at the papers. For a moment, I almost saw something like regret in her expression. But regret doesn't reverse documentation. It took 20 minutes. 20 minutes of whispered arguments, Victor's quiet pleading, Adam's muttered complaints. Then Lorraine signed. Victor signed. Adam didn't have to. The pen made a soft scratching sound against the paper. Structural transfer. Clean, legal, irreversible. When it was done, Lorraine looked up at me, eyes wet. "You're cold," she said hoarsely. I met her gaze steadily. "No," I replied. I'm finished carrying weight that wasn't mine. And for the first time since that casserole dish hit the counter, I felt something solid beneath my feet. The papers were filed within the week. Ownership transferred. Reinstatement wired. Foreclosure halted. Just like that, the house Lorraine had guarded like inherited royalty became a line item under my name. I didn't celebrate. I scheduled inspections. The first time I walked through the property alone after the transfer, it felt less like returning home and more like assessing a site after a contained collapse. The porch railing was loose. The roof flashing had been patched poorly. Water stains crept along the upstairs hallway ceiling where no one had bothered to investigate the leak. Neglect shows up in layers. I moved through each room methodically, clipboard in hand, documenting what needed repair. Not because I planned to live there again, because I planned to restore value. Victor had asked to meet. I agreed, once, at a coffee shop nearby. He looked older than he had 6 months earlier. Thinner. Quieter. "I never thought it would get that far," he admitted. "That was the problem," I replied. He stared into his cup. "Mom says you planned this." I considered that. "I prepared," I said. "There's a difference." He nodded slowly, absorbing it. "What happens now?" he asked. "I renovate. I sell," I said simply. His head snapped up. "You're not keeping it?" I shook my head. "I don't keep structures that required that much reinforcement just to stand." He flinched, but he understood. The renovations took 4 months. I hired contractors I trusted, professionals who showed up when they said they would. We repaired the roof properly, reinforced the foundation supports in the basement, updated plumbing that had been ignored for years. Every improvement felt symbolic, not sentimental, strategic. Lorraine moved into a small condo across town before the listing went live. I heard through Victor that she called it temporary. Adam relocated again, another opportunity in another city. When the house hit the market, it sold within 2 weeks. Wash Park demand hadn't changed. The closing felt quiet, transactional, final. After fees and loan payoff, the equity returned to me was significant, more than I had expected, enough to solidify our life in Seattle permanently. When I flew back that evening, Mateo met me at the airport. "How'd it go?" he asked as we drove home. "It's done," I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Do you feel better?" I thought about it, not triumphant, not vindicated, just steady. "Yes," I answered. Life settled into something uncomplicated after that. Mateo turned 16 that spring, taller than me now. He built a robotics prototype that placed second in a regional competition. He laughed loudly, took up space without apology. The first time I heard him invite friends over without hesitation, I stood in the hallway for a second longer than necessary. Safety changes posture. It changes breath. One night, as we were cleaning up dinner, just the two of us, he asked, "Do you think they're mad at you?" "Probably," I said honestly. He nodded. "Do you care?" I met his eyes. "No." Because anger is lighter than disrespect, and I would choose to carry anger every time if the alternative was watching my child shrink. Later, after he went to bed, I stood by our apartment window overlooking the water. Seattle rain tapped lightly against the glass. I thought about Lorraine's words that night at the table, about lineage, blood, belonging. Structures fail when they refuse to adapt. Families do too. I didn't dismantle that house out of spite. I dismantled the illusion that I needed it, and in its place, I built something stronger, not inherited, chosen, and this time, the foundation held. For a while, I thought that was the end of it. Clean transfer, clean sale, clean break, but endings have a way of echoing. About 8 months after the house sold, I received a letter forwarded from my old Denver address. Handwritten. Lorraine's script, sharp, slanted, deliberate. I almost didn't open it. Curiosity isn't emotional weakness, it's assessment. So I read it. She didn't apologize. Not directly. Lorraine wasn't built for that kind of structural shift. Instead, she wrote about misunderstandings, about how quickly things escalated. She mentioned loneliness, mentioned how quiet the condo felt, mentioned that Victor was still adjusting. Near the end, She wrote one line that made me sit very still. I hope Mateo is well. Not grandson, but his name. It was the first time she had ever written it. I folded the letter carefully and set it on the counter. Mateo was at the table assembling a small drone kit, pieces spread out in organized clusters. Who's it from? He asked without looking up. Lorraine, I said. His hands paused briefly, then continued. What did she say? I considered my answer. She asked about you. That got his attention. He looked up slowly. About me? Yes. He searched my face for something, warning maybe. What did you tell her? He asked. I haven't responded. He nodded once, not disappointed, not hopeful, just processing. After a moment, he said quietly, You don't have to. That's when I understood something I hadn't fully articulated before. Closure isn't always reconciliation. Sometimes it's distance maintained. A week later, Victor called. Not panicked, not desperate, just subdued. I heard the house sold well, he said. It did. I'm glad, he added quickly. You deserved that. The sentence hung between us. It was the closest he had ever come to acknowledging imbalance. How are you? He asked. Steady, I said. He hesitated. Mom's different. People say that word when they mean diminished, quieter, less certain. I hope she finds peace, I replied. There was a long pause. I should have said something that night, he admitted finally. Yes, I thought. You should have, I agreed. No anger in it, just fact. After we hung up, I stood by the window again, watching ferries move slowly across the water. Motion without chaos, purpose without shouting. Later that evening, Mateo joined me. Do you ever regret it? He asked. Leaving? Yeah. I thought carefully. Regret implies doubt about the decision. There wasn't grief sometimes, for what I hoped that family might have been, for the version of Victor who almost chose differently. But grief isn't the same as regret. No, I said finally. I regret staying as long as I did. Mateo leaned his head briefly against my shoulder, a rare gesture now that he was taller than me. I'm glad you chose me, he said quietly. That sentence settled deeper than anything Lorraine had ever written. I turned toward him fully. There was never another option, I said. And I meant it, because in the end, the story was never about property or leverage or proving a point. It was about one moment at a dinner table when a child was told he didn't belong, and what a mother did next. People still ask sometimes, friends, co-workers who hear pieces of the story, whether I went too far. I don't think in terms of far anymore. I think in terms of load, weight applied, weight removed. The structure I left behind collapsed under its own imbalance. The one I built after, it holds. And this time, no one inside it is a guest. Time has a way of sanding down sharp edges, not erasing them, just smoothing them enough that you can touch the memory without bleeding. 2 years after we left Denver, Seattle stopped feeling temporary. The apartment overlooking the Sound turned into a condo. The condo turned into paint colors. Mateo chose himself. Deep blue for his room because he said it made him think clearly. I let him decide. Ownership starts small. I was promoted that spring. Lead structural consultant on a mixed-use high-rise downtown. When I walked the site for the first time, hard hat on, wind tugging at the edge of my jacket, I felt something solid settle inside me. Not pride, exactly. Alignment. I wasn't reinforcing someone else's instability anymore. I was building forward. Mateo was 18 when he graduated. Taller, sharper, steadier than I ever remember being at his age. He gave a short speech at his robotics club banquet, thanked his mentors, thanked my mom for teaching me that foundations matter. I pretended I had something in my eye. We rarely talked about Denver anymore. It wasn't forbidden. It just wasn't central. Until one afternoon when he came home from school holding his phone like it contained something fragile. Grandma Lorraine messaged me, he said. The word grandma still sounded unfamiliar attached to her. I felt the old instinct to protect, to intercept, but I didn't reach for the phone. What did she say? I asked calmly. She said she'd like to have coffee sometime, just to talk. He studied my face carefully, measuring. She doesn't get to hurt you again, I said evenly, but you get to decide what contact looks like. He nodded slowly. I don't think I need coffee, he said after a moment, but I might reply. That's your choice, he did reply. Short, polite, boundaried. I'm doing well. I hope you are too. No invitation, no reopening. When he showed me the message, I saw something I hadn't seen at 14. Agency. Later that evening, I stood at the kitchen counter. The same posture I had in Denver years ago when the casserole dish clinked against granite. Different house, different air, different outcome. I thought about Lorraine sitting alone in that condo, about Victor navigating whatever version of himself he'd become without me buffering conflict. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel resentment. I felt distance. And distance, I've learned, is not cruelty. It's clarity. Mateo joined me at the counter, reaching past me for a glass. "Do you ever think things could have been different?" he asked. "Yes," I said honestly. He waited. "If someone had redistributed the weight," I continued. "If someone had said no when it mattered." He nodded, understanding more than I had at his age. "But they didn't," he said. "No," I agreed. He leaned against the counter, taller than the cabinets now, shoulders relaxed. "I don't feel like a guest anywhere anymore," he said quietly. That sentence was worth every legal document, every plane ticket, every confrontation. "Good," I replied. "You never were." That night, after he went to his room, I stepped onto the balcony. The city lights shimmered against the water, reflections steady despite the movement beneath them. People sometimes ask me what the turning point was. They expect something dramatic, a slammed door, a shouted ultimatum. But the truth is simpler. It was the moment I stopped negotiating my child's worth. The moment I understood that belonging isn't inherited, it's protected. And when I chose him, fully, unapologetically, I didn't dismantle a family. I dismantled a structure that had already failed its most important test. What we built after wasn't louder, it wasn't grander, but it was balanced. And this time, when pressure came, and it always does, the foundation didn't crack, it held. If you had told me years ago that peace would feel unfamiliar at first, I wouldn't have understood. I thought peace would be dramatic, obvious, like stepping out of a storm into bright sunlight. Instead, it arrived quietly. It looked like Mateo leaving his bedroom door open. It sounded like music drifting down the hallway without hesitation. It felt like not bracing when my phone buzzed. By the time Mateo left for college, California Institute of Technology, engineering track, of course, I had fully settled into the rhythm of a life that didn't revolve around defending our right to exist in someone else's space. Helping him pack was surreal. His drone kits, notebooks filled with sketches, the worn hoodie he'd had since freshman year. He moved through the apartment confidently, no longer scanning rooms for tension. At the airport, after we checked his bags, he hugged me hard. "You built something solid," he said. I smiled. "So did you." Watching him walk toward security felt nothing like the night we left Denver. That night had been evacuation. This was expansion. When I returned home alone, the condo felt larger but not emptier. That distinction mattered. Silence without fear is spacious, not hollow. A week later, I received another message from Victor. Not about money, not about property, just a simple update. "Mom's health isn't great. She asks about you sometimes." I stared at the screen longer than necessary. I didn't respond immediately. Not because I didn't care, but because care no longer meant reentry. Eventually, I replied, "I wish her stability. Nothing more, nothing less. The past doesn't require hostility to remain closed." A few months after Mateo started school, I flew down to visit him. We walked across campus under bright California sun, and he introduced me to classmates without hesitation. "This is my mom," he said. No qualifiers, no hesitation, just belonging. Later that evening, sitting on a bench outside his dorm, he looked at me thoughtfully. "Do you ever think leaving was the most important thing you ever did?" he asked. I considered that carefully. "I think choosing was," I said. "Choosing what?" "You." He didn't respond right away. He just nodded slowly, absorbing it the way young adults do when they're finally old enough to understand what protection cost. When I flew back to Seattle, I thought about the dinner table in Denver, about Lorraine's voice, about Victor's silence, about how small Mateo had looked in that moment. What strikes me now isn't the cruelty, it's the clarity. That sentence, "You're not part of this lineage," wasn't the destruction. It was the reveal. Structures don't collapse because of one crack. They collapse because cracks are ignored. And when someone finally points to one and says, "This matters," everything shifts. Lorraine once believed family was defined by blood and inheritance. I've learned it's defined by who stands up when pressure is applied. The irony is, I don't feel like I tore anything down. I simply stopped reinforcing what was misaligned. The house is gone. The marriage is gone. The daily tension is gone. What remains is stronger. Sometimes, late at night, I stand on my balcony overlooking the water and think about all the versions of myself that could have stayed. The version that minimized, the version that endured, the version that hoped someone else would speak first. I'm grateful she didn't win, because the woman who walked out that door with her son didn't just leave a house. She recalculated the entire load-bearing system of her life, and this time, every beam rests where it belongs. There's a strange thing that happens after survival. People expect you to carry visible scars, to talk about resilience like it was forged in fire, to frame everything as either tragedy or triumph. But most of my life now feels ordinary. And ordinary, I've learned, is a luxury. 3 years after we left Denver, I stood inside another house, this one newly built, clean lines, reinforced steel frame, windows facing west toward the water. Not a condo, not temporary. Mine. I hadn't rushed into buying again. I took my time, ran the numbers, waited until it felt like a decision made from stability, not reaction. When I signed the closing documents, my hand didn't shake. There was no urgency behind it. No need to prove anything, just ownership. Mateo flew up that weekend to see it. He walked through the front door slowly, scanning the space with the same observant expression he'd had as a child. Only now there was no tension behind it. "It feels solid," he said. I smiled at that. "It is," I replied. "Deep foundation, seismic reinforcement." He laughed. "I meant emotionally." "Same answer," I said. We stood in the kitchen, wide counters, warm wood cabinets, light pouring in from the west-facing windows. I thought about another kitchen years ago, another counter, another moment where everything shifted. This one held no ghosts. Later that evening, we sat on the back patio watching the sky turn orange over the Sound. Mateo told me about a research project he was joining. Structural modeling, ironically. He was fascinated by failure analysis, how systems break and why. Sometimes collapse is predictable, he said, if you know where to look. "Yes," I said quietly. "It usually is." He studied me for a moment. "Do you ever miss them?" he asked, not accusing, just curious. I considered the question honestly. "I miss what I hoped they could be," I said, "not what they were." That distinction took years to understand. Victor and I speak occasionally now, polite, distant. There's no bitterness in his voice anymore, just a kind of subdued awareness. He remarried last year. I wished him well, not because I'd forgotten, but because holding on to anger is another kind of weight, and I've become very selective about what I carry. Lorraine never reached out again after that brief exchange years ago. I heard through Victor that her health declined slowly. Quietly. There was no dramatic reconciliation scene, no apology wrapped in tears. And I'm okay with that, because closure isn't always about hearing the words. Sometimes it's about not needing them. When Mateo left to fly back to school that Sunday night, he hugged me tightly at the airport. "You built something better," he said. "No," I corrected gently. "We did." Driving home alone, I didn't feel the old ache of emptiness. I felt expansion. Space, the kind of space that isn't waiting to be filled by someone else's expectations. I unlocked the door to my house, my name alone on the deed, and stepped inside. Quiet, steady, secure. People still ask, sometimes, whether I went too far that night at the dinner table, whether there might have been a softer solution. I don't answer with defensiveness anymore. I answer with truth. There are moments in life when someone tests the integrity of your foundation, when they decide whether your child belongs, when silence becomes endorsement. In those moments, you don't negotiate. You choose. I chose my son. I chose stability over tradition. I chose respect over proximity. And years later, standing in a house built on my own terms, I can say this with certainty. I didn't dismantle a family. I dismantled a structure that required my child to shrink in order to stand. And I will never regret refusing that design. Here's the truth. Pay attention to the small cracks before they become collapses. If someone consistently makes you or your child feel smaller, that's not tradition. That's a design flaw. Learn your numbers. Know your leverage. Silence is a decision, and so is walking away. You don't have to set yourself on fire to keep someone else's house warm. Protect your peace like it's prime real estate. And if you enjoy strategic boundaries with a side of poetic justice, subscribe to the Revenge Protocol YouTube channel and drop a comment. Structural integrity thrives in the comment section too.